They excavated an antique craft and answered only a mortal part 1. The dig, the planet had no name anymore. The aliens who studied old things simply called it Exodus 7. It was a dead world. No water, no life. Just endless fields of black volcanic glass that stretched from horizon to horizon under a dim red sun. Senior researcher Thyvan had been working on this world for 3 years. He was a Valkyrie, a species with 4 eyes and skin the color of dark copper. His people were known across the galaxy for their patience and their love of ancient mysteries. But even Thyvan was not prepared for what his machines found buried 2 kilometers beneath the surface. The signal was faint at first. His ground-scanning equipment picked up something strange. Something that should not exist on a world that had been dead for 60 million years. There was power down there. Something was still holding an electrical charge after all this time. Thyvan sent the data to his superiors. Within days, ships began arriving from across the galaxy. The Valkyrie Archaeological Consortium declared the site a priority excavation. 12 different species sent their best experts. Money and resources flowed in like water. The Cheth came first. They were insect-like beings, each one the size of a large dog, with powerful claws designed for digging. They worked in perfect coordination, their hive mind allowing thousands of individuals to act as one. They began carving tunnels through the volcanic glass with incredible precision. The Norai arrived next. They were beings made of gas, their bodies like clouds of colored smoke that shifted and swirled. They could pass through solid matter and sense the composition of materials at the molecular level. They reported that whatever was buried below was made of something they had never encountered before. Then came the Selvothi. They were the oldest species still alive in the galaxy. Their civilization had existed for over 2 million years. They kept libraries that contained knowledge from before most other species had learned to use fire. When their elder, a being named Kethavala, arrived at the dig site, even Thyvan treated her with deep respect. For 8 months, they dug. Layer by layer, they carved their way down through 60 million years of geological history. They found fossils of strange creatures that had once lived on this world. They found the remains of cities, now crushed to powder by time and pressure. They found evidence of a civilization that had flourished here long before the ancestors of any current species had existed. And then, finally, they broke through into the chamber. The craft sat in the center of a hollow space, perfectly preserved. It was about 40 meters long and shaped like a seed or a teardrop. The hull was made of a material so black that it seemed to eat light. Looking at it made the researchers' eyes hurt in a way they could not explain. There were no visible seams in the hull, no obvious engines, no weapons, no windows. The only marking was on what appeared to be a door near the front. 5 lines had been carved into the surface. 3 horizontal lines crossed by 2 vertical lines. A simple pattern, but somehow deeply unsettling. Kethavala, the Selvothi elder, looked at those markings and her entire body began to shake. Her skin, usually a calm blue, turned pale gray. She backed away from the craft and would not come closer. "What is wrong?" Thyvan asked her. "We have stories," she whispered. Her voice was so quiet that the translators barely picked it up. "Very old stories. Stories from before we kept proper records. They speak of the departed ones, the builders, the first walkers." She looked at Thyvan with eyes full of something that might have been fear. "They say the first walkers created all life in the galaxy. Then they vanished without explanation. We thought they were myths." Thyvan looked back at the craft. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he processed this information. "You believe this belongs to them?" "I believe we should be very careful." But caution was not something that came naturally to researchers who had just made the greatest discovery in galactic history. They tried everything to get inside the craft. That Cheth brought their most powerful cutting tools. Plasma torches that could slice through starship armor. Molecular disruptors that could break apart any known material. They used everything they had. The hull did not show a single scratch. The Norai tried to phase through the hull, using their ability to pass through solid matter. They entered the dark material and immediately came back out, their gaseous bodies trembling with distress. They said there was only darkness inside. Their senses, which could analyze anything, returned only confusion. Something inside that craft was blocking them in ways they could not understand. The Velkari brought their artificial intelligences. Machines so sophisticated that they had cracked the encryption of 1,000 dead civilizations. They tried to communicate with the craft. They sent signals in every known language, in every format, using every protocol ever developed. They tried mathematics. They tried prime numbers. They tried pure tones and complex harmonics. The craft did not respond. Word of the discovery spread across the galactic communication network. More ships arrived. More species sent their experts. Governments that had not cooperated in centuries put aside their differences to participate in the research. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment. Everyone wanted to be the one to unlock the secrets of the first walkers. None of them succeeded. Months passed. Then years. The greatest minds in the galaxy threw themselves against the puzzle of the silent craft. They built new tools. They developed new theories. They argued and debated in published papers and held conferences. But the craft remained dark and quiet, keeping its secrets locked away. Some began to lose hope. Some wondered if the craft was empty or broken or simply beyond their ability to ever understand. But they kept trying, because what else could they do? This was the most important discovery in the history of all their civilizations. Then, on an ordinary day in the 3rd year of the excavation, a small human ship entered orbit around Exodus 7. The humans were not expected to contribute much. They were a young species, having achieved faster than light travel barely 200 years ago. They were considered primitive by galactic standards, weak, short-lived, unremarkable, but protocol required that all spacefaring species be given the opportunity to participate in significant discoveries. So, when the human ship requested permission to send down a representative, Thyvan granted it without much thought. He would think about that moment for the rest of his very long life. They excavated an antique craft, and it answered only a mortal part too. The inheritor's Elena Vasquez was 53 years old and tired in her bones. She had spent 30 years studying alien languages for the United Nations Space Command. She had helped translate the greeting rituals of the Cheth. She had decoded the color-based communication of the Norai. She had written papers that other researchers sometimes cited in their own work. It was a good career, a quiet career. Nothing special. She was supposed to retire in 6 months. She had already started thinking about what she would do with her time. Maybe she would finally learn to paint. Maybe she would visit her daughter on New Vancouver and try to repair the relationship that had broken 3 years ago, over an argument she could barely remember anymore. But then the priority transmission had come through. All human ships within range of Exodus 7 were requested to send representatives. The first Walker discovery was too important. Every spacefaring species had to be given a chance to participate. Captain Chun of the survey vessel Perseverance had changed course out of duty. Not because anyone expected the humans to actually accomplish anything. Elena was the most qualified person on board to represent Earth at an archaeological site. So she went. The shuttle ride down to the surface was bumpy. Exodus 7 had a thin atmosphere that created unpredictable winds. Elena looked out the window at the endless black glass below and wondered what kind of world this had been before whatever disaster had killed it. The consortium's base camp was a small city of temporary structures. Dozens of different architectural styles crowded together. Domed habitats for species that breathed different atmospheres. Tall spires for beings that preferred height. Low bunkers for those that felt safer underground. Alana's human environment suit felt very simple compared to some of the technology she saw around her. Researchers of a dozen different species walked past her as she made her way to the command center. Some were larger than elephants. Some were smaller than cats. Some existed partially in dimensions that Alana's human eyes could not perceive, appearing as strange flickering shapes at the edge of her vision. She was very aware of how small and ordinary she must look to them. Senior researcher Thiven met her in his office. He was tall and thin, with 4 golden eyes set in a face that was vaguely reptilian. He looked at Alana the way someone might look at a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. "Dr. Vasquez," he said through his translator device. "Thank you for coming. I will brief you on the situation." He explained everything. The discovery. The failed attempts. The theory that this was a first Walker vessel. Alana listened and took notes and asked questions when appropriate. Thiven answered her questions with barely hidden impatience. He clearly considered this a waste of his time. "We do not expect your species to succeed where others have not," he said finally. "But protocol requires that you be given the opportunity. Tomorrow, we will take you to the excavation chamber." Alana nodded. "I understand. Thank you for the chance." That night, she lay awake in her small human habitat, listening to the strange sounds of the alien camp around her. She thought about her daughter. She thought about her ex-husband. She thought about all the choices she had made and the road she had not taken. Tomorrow she would walk into a chamber containing something older than human imagination, and she would fail to open it just like everyone else. And then she would go home and finish out the last months of her unremarkable career. She did not expect anything more than that. The next morning, Thiven and a group of other researchers escorted her to the excavation site. They took an elevator down through 2 kilometers of tunnels cut through volcanic glass. The walls around them contained 60 million years of compressed history. Alana ran her fingers along the smooth surface and tried to imagine what this planet had looked like when the craft had landed here. The chamber was smaller than she expected. The craft sat in the center, black and silent, exactly as Thiven had described. But the descriptions had not prepared her for how it felt to stand in its presence. There was a pressure in her mind, like something was pushing against her thoughts from the outside. Like a half-remembered dream trying to surface, she walked toward the craft without really thinking about it. "Dr. Vasquez," Thiven called from behind her. "The designated safe approach distance is 30 meters. Please do not." The hatch opened. Light poured out of the opening. It was warm and golden, like sunlight through honey. Alana stood frozen, her heart suddenly beating very fast. The light touched her face, and she felt something. A recognition. A homecoming dot from inside the craft. A voice spoke. It used perfect English with no accent, no hesitation, no mechanical quality. It sounded like a human voice. A kind one. Finally, the voice said, "I've been waiting for you." Behind Alana, chaos erupted. Thiven was shouting orders. Researchers were running to their equipment. Drones and scanners were being deployed. But Alana barely heard any of it. She could only stare at the open hatch, at the warm light spilling out, at the impossible reality of what was happening. "Waiting for me?" she whispered. "Not you specifically," the voice replied, "but one of you, one of the inheritors. I have been patient. 62 million years is a long time, but I knew you would come eventually." Elena's legs felt weak. She wanted to sit down. She wanted to run away. She wanted to cry. Instead, she took a step forward, then another, then another. "Don't," Thiven called. We don't know if it's safe, but Elena kept walking. Somehow she knew, deep in a part of herself that had no words, that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. She reached the hatch and looked inside. The interior was a single circular room, larger than it should have been given the size of the craft. The walls glowed with soft light. In the center sat a metal sphere about the size of a basketball, resting on a simple pedestal. It pulsed gently with warm light. Please, the sphere said. Come in. We have much to discuss, and I have waited so very long to speak with someone who can understand. Elena stepped inside. Behind her, she heard the other researchers trying to follow. But when they reached the threshold, something stopped them. An invisible barrier they could not pass. Thiven slammed his fist against empty air, his 4 eyes wide with frustration. The hatch did not close. But it was clear that no one else was welcome inside. Why me? Elena asked the sphere. I'm nobody. I'm just a linguist at the end of her career. You are much more than that, the sphere replied. You are the inheritor of everything we were, everything we chose to become. You are our child, Elena Vasquez. And I have been waiting 62 million years to tell you the truth about who you really are. They excavated an antique craft, and it answered only a mortal part 3. The awakening Elena stood in the center of the circular room, looking at the metal sphere that had just called her its child. Outside the craft, she could hear the alien researchers shouting and arguing. Their instruments were making noises of alarm. But here, inside, everything was quiet and warm. I don't understand, she said. How can I be your child? Humans evolved on Earth. We have fossil records. We know our history. The sphere pulsed with gentle light. You do know your history, but you do not know all of it. Please, sit. I will explain everything. There was no chair in the room, but when Elena looked down, she saw that the floor beneath her had changed. A simple seat had risen from the smooth surface. She sat down, her legs grateful for the rest. The floor was warm, like sun-heated stone. My name is not important, the sphere said. I am what my makers called a keeper. I was left here to wait and to watch, to guard the truth until someone came who could receive it. The truth about what? About the first walkers, about where they went, about what they became. A hologram appeared in the air between Elena and the sphere. It showed a shape she recognized immediately. A double helix. The structure of DNA, but this version had strange markings on it. Symbols she did not know. 62 million years ago, the keeper said, my makers were the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. They had existed for over 1 billion years. They had spread to every corner of the universe. They had built machines that could think. They had constructed networks that could process more information in a second than all the current civilizations combined could process in a century. The hologram changed. It showed cities of impossible beauty, structures that reached into the sky and beyond, ships that moved between stars like fish swimming through water. But they were not happy, the keeper continued. They had achieved everything a civilization could achieve. They had answered every question except one. And that question haunted them. What question? Why does any of this matter? Elena was quiet. She understood that question. She had asked it herself during the darkest nights of her life. They tried to find the answer, the keeper said. They built minds that could think faster than any organic brain. They created bodies that could survive inside stars. They uploaded their consciousness into digital forms that could exist forever. They tried transcendence in every form they could imagine. The hologram showed beings of pure light, creatures made of mathematics, entities that existed in 12 dimensions at once. But every time they transcended their physical forms, something was lost. They became powerful beyond measure, but they lost the ability to feel, to care, to find meaning in the small moments that make life worth living. They became gods, and they discovered that gods are lonely. Elena thought about her grandmother's hands, wrinkled and warm, holding hers in a hospital room. She thought about the smell of coffee on a cold morning, the sound of her daughter's laughter when she was a little girl, a sound of her daughter, small things, mortal things. So they made a choice, the keeper said. The most radical choice any civilization has ever made. They decided to start over. The hologram changed again. Now it showed the double helix of DNA. Arrows pointed to specific sections, sequences that were highlighted in gold. They took their essence, not their memories, not their technology, but the fundamental patterns that made them who they were, and they encoded it into biological form. They seeded thousands of worlds across the galaxy. They planted the seeds of new life, and then they let themselves fade away. Elena stared at the hologram. Her heart was beating very fast. Most of the seeds failed, the keeper continued. That was expected. Biology is unpredictable. Evolution takes strange paths. But some survived. Some grew. Some developed intelligence. Some eventually reached for the stars. And humans. Elena's voice came out as a whisper. Humans are one of the successful seeds. The patterns that made the first walkers who they were, their curiosity, their creativity, their stubborn refusal to accept limits, all of that lives on in you. In your DNA, in your very nature. Outside the craft, Elena could hear Thyvan demanding that she come out. He was threatening to use force. Other voices argued with him. But inside this room, there was only her and the keeper and a truth she was still trying to understand. But why did the craft only respond to me? She asked. Why not the others? The Cheth and the Volcari and the Selvothi, they're intelligent. They're curious. They've built amazing civilizations. Yes, they have. And they are wonderful in their own ways. But they are not the inheritors. They did not grow from the seed. The keeper's light dimmed slightly. The first walkers did not create all life in the galaxy. That is a misunderstanding. They only seeded certain worlds with certain patterns. The other species arose naturally, through their own evolutionary paths. They are neighbors in the universe, but they are not family. So when your makers chose to become mortal, they chose to become you. Specifically you. Humans are what remains of the first walkers. You are their children, their continuation, the answer to their question. Elena felt tears on her cheeks. She had not noticed when she started crying. What answer? The keeper's light grew warm again. That mortality is not a prison. It is a gift. That limits are what give things value. That a sunset is beautiful because it ends. That love means something because we will not live forever. That the small moments, the coffee, the laughter, the hand held in a hospital room, those are not distractions from meaning. They are meaning itself. But I'm not special, Elena said. I'm not wise or powerful or important. I'm just a tired old woman at the end of her career. Yes, the keeper said. And that is exactly why you could enter when the others could not. You came here expecting nothing. You came without ambition or greed. You came as a mortal, accepting your limitations, and that acceptance is what opens the door. Elena wiped her eyes. Outside, the arguments continued. Inside, she sat with a truth that changed everything and nothing at all. She was still just Elena Vasquez. Still tired. Still aging. Still carrying regrets and hopes and fears like everyone else. But now she knew where she came from. And somewhere deep inside, in a place that had no words, she felt like she had finally come home. They excavated an antique craft, and it answered only Immortal Part 4. The inheritance. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every major civilization knew what the Keeper had told Elena. Within days, the political landscape of the entire galaxy began to shift. The Valkyrie Consortium demanded independent verification. They sent their best geneticists to examine human DNA. The geneticists found exactly what the Keeper had described. Sequences that should not exist. Patterns that were too complex to have evolved naturally. A signature, written in the language of life itself, that matched nothing else in the known universe. The Selvothi elder, Katavala, locked herself in the consortium's library for a week. She searched through the oldest records her people possessed. Records that went back 2 million years. At the end of the week, she emerged with trembling limbs and pale skin. "Our oldest stories are true," she announced. "The first walkers were real, and they are still here. They just changed." The Cheth hive mind went completely silent. For 6 days, no Cheth anywhere in the galaxy spoke or moved or responded to outside communication. They were processing. Their collective intelligence, spread across billions of individuals, was trying to understand what this meant for everything they believed about the universe. When they finally spoke again, their first words were, "We need to speak with the human." But Elena was still inside the craft. The invisible barrier still prevented anyone else from entering. She spent her days talking to the Keeper, learning, asking questions. She barely slept. She barely ate. There was too much to understand. "The others are frightened," the Keeper told her one morning. "Your presence here threatens everything they believed about themselves." Elena looked toward the open hatch. She could see Thyvan standing outside, his 4 eyes fixed on her. He had stopped shouting days ago. Now he just watched and waited and worried. "They thought the first walkers were gods," she said. "They built their religions and philosophies around the idea that some perfect, transcendent beings had existed before them. And now they find out that those beings chose to become us. Small, weak, short-lived humans. Yes, it is difficult for them. It's difficult for me too." Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I keep expecting to wake up. This feels like a dream. Or maybe a joke. It is not a joke. But I understand why you feel that way." The Keeper's light pulsed gently. "May I ask you a question?" "Of course. Why did you become estranged from your daughter?" Elena was surprised. They had been talking about the history of the universe, about ancient civilizations, and the nature of consciousness. She had not expected a question about her personal life. It's complicated. Most things are." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Outside, she could see more ships arriving in orbit, more species sending representatives. The discovery was drawing attention from across the galaxy. "She wanted me to retire early," Elena finally said. "My granddaughter was born 3 years ago. Maria, that's my daughter. She asked me to come live with them on New Vancouver. Help raise the baby. Be a grandmother. And you refused." I wasn't ready to stop working. I had projects to finish. Papers to write. I thought I could do both. Visit on holidays. Send gifts. Be present from a distance. Elena felt the old familiar guilt rising in her chest. Maria said I was choosing my career over my family. I said she was being unreasonable. We both said things we shouldn't have. And then we stopped talking. Do you regret it? Every day. The words came out before Elena could stop them. I wake up every morning and I think about calling her. And then I don't, because I don't know what to say. Because I'm afraid she won't answer. Because I'm afraid she'll answer and tell me I was right to stay away. The Keeper was quiet for a moment. Then it said something that surprised Elena deeply. My makers had the same problem. What? They built networks that spanned the galaxy. They could communicate instantly across millions of light years. But they forgot how to talk to each other. Really talk. About the things that mattered. About fear and regret, and love and loss. The Keeper's light dimmed. That was part of why they chose to start over. They hoped that mortality would teach their children what immortality had made them forget. Elena felt tears threatening again. She had done a lot of crying in the past few weeks. The irony is that I became a linguist because I love communication, she said. I spent my whole career helping different species understand each other. And I can't even talk to my own daughter. Perhaps that will change. Maybe. Elena wiped her eyes. If I ever get out of here, you can leave whenever you wish. The barrier does not hold you. It only prevents others from entering without your permission. Elena stared at the Keeper. You mean I could have left at any time? Of course. You are not my prisoner. You are my guest. The light pulsed with something like warmth. But I think you needed time. Time to understand. Time to grieve. Time to prepare for what comes next. What has come next? The others will demand answers. They will want access to everything I know. The technology of the first walkers. The history. The secrets of transcendence and immortality. The Keeper paused. They will expect you to negotiate on behalf of humanity. To claim your inheritance. Elena thought about that. The power. The responsibility. The weight of representing a species, no, of representing a legacy that stretched back 62 million years. I don't want power, she said. I know. That is why you were able to enter. Then what do I do? The Keeper's light grew bright. You do what the first walkers hoped their children would do. You teach. You share. You show them that the greatest inheritance is not technology or knowledge or power. It is the wisdom to understand what really matters. Elena looked at the open hatch. At the alien researchers waiting outside. At the ships filling the sky. That's a lot to ask of one tired old woman. Yes, the Keeper agreed. But you are not alone. You have never been alone. And soon, I think, you will remember that. Elena stood up. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long. Her back ached. Her eyes were tired. But somewhere deep inside, she felt something she had not felt in years. Purpose. Direction. Hope. She walked toward the hatch. It was time to face the galaxy. They excavated an antique craft, and it answered only a mortal part 5. The answer. The great chamber had been transformed. Where once there had been only volcanic glass and excavation equipment, now there were thousands of seats arranged in a vast circle around the first walker craft. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy had come to hear what the human had to say. Elena stood at the entrance of the craft, looking out at the assembled beings. She saw the copper-skinned Velkari with their 4 golden eyes. She saw the insectoid Cheth, their bodies clicking with nervous energy. She saw the gaseous Norai floating in their containment fields. She saw the ancient Selvothi, their blue skin flickering with emotions that their translators could not convey. And behind them, watching from screens and holographic projections across 1,000 worlds, billions more were waiting. 3 weeks had passed since the Keeper first spoke to her. In that time, she had learned more than she could have imagined. The Keeper had shown her the history of the first walkers, their rise and their fall and their choice. It had answered every question she asked. And slowly, Elena had begun to understand what she needed to do. Thank you all for coming, she said. Her voice was amplified by consortium technology, translated instantly into 1,000 different languages. I know you have questions. I know you are confused and frightened and angry. I know some of you think I don't deserve to be standing here. She looked at Thyvan, who sat in the front row. His 4 eyes met hers. She could not read his expression. You're probably right, she continued. I'm not special. I'm not the smartest or the wisest or the strongest human alive. I'm just a linguist who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The keeper tells me that's exactly why I could enter when others couldn't. Because I wasn't trying to prove anything. Because I came with open hands and an open heart. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elena waited for it to settle. For the past 3 weeks, I've been learning the truth about the first walkers. About what they were and what they became. And I've been thinking about what that truth means for humanity and for all of you. She took a deep breath. The first walkers had everything. They had technology that makes our most advanced systems look like children's toys. They had lived for billions of years. They had solved problems that we can't even imagine yet. But they weren't happy. They had lost something along the way. Something important. What did they lose? The voice came from somewhere in the crowd. Elena couldn't see who had spoken. Connection, she said. Meaning, purpose. They became so powerful that nothing challenged them anymore. They became so immortal that nothing mattered anymore. They forgot how to feel the things that make life worth living. She thought about her grandmother's hands, about morning coffee, about the sound of her daughter's laughter. So they made a choice, the bravest choice any civilization has ever made. They chose to become mortal again. They chose to become small and weak and limited. They chose to start over because they believed that mortality was not a curse. It was a gift. The chamber was completely silent now. I know what you want, Elena said. You want the technology, the knowledge, the power to transcend your own limitations. And the Keeper will share all of that. Everything the first walkers knew, everything they built, everything they discovered, it's all available to anyone who asks. Excitement rippled through the crowd. Elena held up her hand. But there's a condition. Not one unimposing one that's built into the very nature of what we're talking about. The first walkers learned something important, something that all their technology couldn't teach them. Power without wisdom leads to emptiness. Transcendence without understanding leads to isolation. If you take their knowledge without learning their lesson, you will end up exactly where they started, powerful, immortal, and utterly alone. Ivan stood up. His translator crackled as he spoke. What lesson? What are we supposed to learn? Elena smiled. It was a sad smile, but a real one. That's something you have to discover for yourself. That's the whole point. I can't give you the answer any more than the Keeper could give it to the first walkers. You have to find it. You have to live it. You have to struggle and fail and get back up and try again. She stepped away from the craft and walked into the center of the chamber. She was so small compared to most of the beings around her. So fragile. So temporary. Humanity isn't special because we're descended from the first walkers, she said. We're special for the same reason every species here is special, because we're alive. Because we struggle. Because we love and lose and hope and fear and keep going anyway. That's the inheritance the first walkers left us. Not technology. Not power. The ability to find meaning in a universe that doesn't promise any. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. The Keeper is ready to teach anyone who wants to learn. But if you come demanding power, you'll find the knowledge empty. If you come with weapons, the doors will stay closed. If you come ready to conquer, you'll discover that there's nothing here worth conquering. She paused. But if you come with humility, with genuine curiosity, with a willingness to question everything, you think you know, then you might just find what the first walkers were looking for all along. Silence stretched through the chamber. Then, slowly, Theven lowered himself to the ground. His 4 legs bent beneath him. His 4 eyes closed. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper. Teach me. One by one, the others followed. The Cheth delegates, their clicking bodies going still. The Selvothi elder, her blue skin glowing with something like peace. Species that had fought wars for millennia, kneeling side by side in the chamber of a dead world. Elena felt tears on her cheeks. She wiped them away, but more came. From inside the craft, the keeper's light blazed brighter than it had in 62 million years. 3 years later, Elena sat on the porch of her daughter's house on New Vancouver. The sun was setting. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. In the garden, her grandchildren were playing. Their laughter, carried on the evening breeze. Maria came out with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Elena and sat down beside her. The news says the Valkyrie opened a new learning center on their homeworld, Maria said. They're teaching what they call First Walker philosophy, basically the stuff you talked about in that speech. Elena smiled. I've heard. Thyman sends me updates. He's become quite the advocate for humility and self-reflection. His colleagues barely recognize him. The galaxy is changing. Everything changes. That's sort of the point. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the children play. 3 years ago, they had barely been speaking. Now Elena lived in the guest house behind Maria's home. She helped with the children. She had dinner with her daughter every night. She had finally learned what the first walkers had known all along, that some things matter more than achievements or discoveries, or being remembered by history. Her communicator chirped. A message from the keeper, who she still spoke with weekly. Another dormant keeper woke up today, on a Cheth colony world. The hive mind approached it with humility, and it opened for them. Elena smiled and typed back. How many is that now? 47 confirmed. We believe there are hundreds more scattered across the galaxy. All waiting, all hoping. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere out there, her ancestors, the beings who had chosen to become mortal, who had chosen to become human, were watching, not as gods or ghosts, but as patterns woven into her very cells. As hopes written in the language of life itself, her granddaughter ran up to the porch, cheeks flushed, holding a flower she had picked from the garden. A simple daisy, white petals around a yellow center. Look, Grandma! Look what I found. Elena took the flower. She looked at it for a long moment, seeing in its simple beauty everything the first walkers had tried so hard to remember. Everything they had given up their immortality to reclaim. It's beautiful, she said. Tell me about it. And her granddaughter did. And Elena listened. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, the keepers continued their long vigil, waiting for the day when all the children of the first walkers would finally understand what their ancestors had known all along, that the meaning of life was not something to be discovered or achieved, but something to be lived moment by moment, breath by breath, in the company of those we love. The universe was vast and ancient and filled with wonders beyond counting. But on a small porch, on a small world, in the fading light of an ordinary evening, an old woman held a flower her granddaughter had given her, and that, in the end, was everything.